Viewer discretion is advised.
The Jets. Good to see a franchise back in Winnipeg since the last version of this team left. You were a disaster in Atlanta for 10 years, making the playoff once and getting swept. Then you came back to Winnipeg and made the playoffs and promptly got swept. Ah yeah, the Winnipeg whiteout. You got covered in something else white in 2015 by the Ducks, that's for sure. Mark Chipman is a Winnipeg native whose dad owned a bunch of car dealerships in the area and leveraged that capital into True North Entertainment, which owns real estate dealerships and has other holdings. Chipman was instrumental in bringing a team back to Winnipeg as he bought the Atlanta Thrashers in 2011 and moved them up north.
With the longest time period between the year it opened and its first NHL season, Bell MTS Place was the home of the Manitoba Moose from 2004 to 2011 until the Thrashers were shipped to Winnipeg. The Moose came back in 2015 and is the Jets' AHL affiliate. Because the arena was built as a minor league venue, it has the smallest seating capacity in the league. It's also home of the Winnipeg Whiteout and Connor Hellebuck's Shifty Eyes.
So it's come down to this. The Arizona Coyotes, a longtime staple of futility in the NHL landscape, are being forced out of Glendale. After the 2021-22 season, they are being kicked out for a multitude of reasons. It felt like this was inevitable. Too many years where things were on the edge, too much financial bleeding for both the team and Glendale itself. If they stay in the Phoenix area isn't known, as there's a chance they could move to Tempe, but leaving the city is a very real possibility. To watch a team move, even for a hardcore fan base as small as the Coyotes, is tough. But it's an inevitability in North American sports. They want to make money. If something isn't lining up, they either force their way out or move by necessity. Before this situation, the last team to move in the NHL were the revival of the Winnipeg Jets. Home to one of the smallest arenas in hockey, yet one of the most passionate fan bases in the game. Even then, comparable to how Winnipeg lost a team to Phoenix, the city took a team from another area. That team was the Atlanta Thrashers. I never really gave them much thought when I was younger. They were either too poor to take seriously or too mediocre to be considered as a legitimate threat. I always considered it as a foolish attempt by the NHL to try to expand south, but in hindsight, that doesn't seem like the right take. I think we need to re-examine this whole situation. Was Atlanta really at fault for not supporting the Thrashers? Or were there other elements at play? To consider things fully, look to the past. The Thrashers weren't the first foray by the NHL into the city. Back in the 1970s, the Flames were originally an Atlanta franchise. The decade of disco wasn't all bad for the group. They were okay. They weren't an open eyesore in the league like a few other franchises, but they were far from the elite. They had consistently made the playoffs, but experienced little success in them. Want to take a wild guess as to their record in the playoffs? They went 2-15 in them during their time in Atlanta. The team itself did nothing wrong. They did what they could to succeed, but there was bad luck aplenty. The local economy went to shit. Ownership was bleeding money and on the brink of financial collapse. Fans slowly tuned out and walked away either due to apathy or lack of spending capital. Why support a team that's just going to bow to the playoffs in 2 or 3 games? The average fan doesn't want to spend money on mediocrity. By 1980, nothing they did worked. Atlanta had become captivated by other teams. So just like General Sherman, the Flames torched the city for $16 million. They were moving to Calgary. Whatever fan base was left could only bitterly watch as the team would eventually have the playoff success that could have captivated the locals. Imagine if that 1981 run happened earlier. Perhaps the Flames would have stayed in Atlanta longer, possibly permanently, but it wasn't meant to be. Hockey would get another chance here, however. The year was 1999. The NHL, eager to expand their product into untapped markets, decided to give Atlanta another chance. But even this early, I start to realize something. The chance the league gave to the city was hollow. If you were to consider the expansion draft that Atlanta had to choose from, it was pretty bad. The year before, Nashville got the main pickings, and even they had been slim. The NHL itself didn't help matters. Any team that had lost a goalie in the expansion draft to Nashville was exempt from offering one to Atlanta. So there goes 5 teams' goalies out the bat. The other pickings were pretty slim. Prospects with limited upside, past prime veterans, or impending free agents. The only real player I can see who was young and could have long-term impact is Sergei Brylin, and New Jersey wanted to protect him. They offered Atlanta Sergei Vyshenkovich instead, who did a whole lot of nothing for the Thrashers. There was also Igor Larionov available, but would he have stayed in Atlanta? Not that it mattered. Detroit traded off Samuelson's expiring contract to keep him in tow. Don Waddell was the GM here. His opening round was rough, but his true test was coming up. 1999 was an incredibly weak year for the NHL draft, but he held the #1 pick after a trade with Vancouver. The team's first ever selection? Patrick Stefan. He did not pan out. Unless you want to count the meme world on a different team, then maybe you can argue he was elite. The same cannot be said for the Thrashers in their first few years. Besides Ray Ferraro's reemergence, there was little to be excited for. They lost. And lost. And lost more than that. It allowed them to pick up some nice talents in the draft like Ilya Kovalchuk, Danny Heatley, and Kari Lehtinen, but there wasn't much else coming. The Thrashers had a deadly sin. They couldn't draft outside the first round. And sometimes they couldn't even draft properly in the first round. If you were to name the non-first round players who had played over 100 games for the team in their drafts, you could count them on one hand until 2009. Garnet Exelby, Pasi Nurminen, Toby Enstrom, Andre Pavlek, Paul Postma, and Ben Sherratt. That's throughout their entire history in Atlanta. That is fucking terrible. The only impact players here were Enstrom and maybe Pavlek. All that the Thrashers had was a black eye. On September 29, 2003, Danny Heatley and Dan Snyder were involved in a car crash. Heatley had been driving recklessly down suburban Atlanta and the car struck a wall, splitting in half. At least for Heatley, he only suffered injuries, taking him out for most of the season. Dan Snyder wasn't as lucky. He suffered septic shock and died 5 days later. The young franchise now had a dark chapter to deal with, and the city and Thrashers rallied around Heatley. But even for all of the love and support, Danny didn't want to be reminded of the tragedy and requested a trade. In a sharp blow, he got shipped to Ottawa for Marian Hossa and Greg DeVries. Hossa was great, but not the same as a homegrown player like Heatley. The trauma of that day lingered on, and it may have affected fans as well. Amplifying factors was one related to the low payrolls and piss-poor drafting. They didn't win. They had upside in the mid-2000s, but they could never capitalize on it due to elements in and out of their control. Unlike their previous iteration, the Thrashers only made the playoffs once in 2007. They were swept. It's not like they didn't try. Don Waddell brought in veterans to get the team going. Bobby Holik, Slava Kozlov, Keith Kachuk, Alexei Zhitnik, who they traded Braden Coburn for. The idea was right, but without true support, the team itself was hollow. Atlanta brings in all these veterans, but lets go of Mark Savard after a breakout season? They had high-end skill, but little depth. So they would usually miss the postseason, even if it was only by 2 points like in 2006. They were mediocre. The worst place to be for a team. If only that was the worst outcome. We need to rewind a few years back to 2003. The Thrashers' original owner and Time Warner was going through chaotic issues of their own. They needed to cut assets due to their disastrous merger with AOL. So there go the Thrashers and Hawks onto the market. You know where this is going. Hell itself was about to enter the picture for the team. A nightmare ownership group that put more effort into fighting each other than they did support the city. Atlanta Spirit. A collective of businessmen from Atlanta, DC, and Boston who banded together to buy the Thrashers and Hawks. All you have to do is mention this name to anyone in Atlanta. There will be choice words used. Right after that 2007 season, Atlanta Spirit was remarkably chaotic. They were more interested in suing a partner in Scott Belkin than they were in overseeing the Thrashers and Hawks. Somehow they cared even less for their hockey team than anything else. And the only thing the relentless flinging of lawsuits did was wreck their financial strength. Don Waddell had no one to answer to but one directive: reduce payroll. The Thrashers allegedly lost $20 million in 2007, and struggling in 2008 gave them the impetus to trade their stars in incredibly lopsided deals. Marian Hossa was a free agent after the season, so it was a good excuse to send him to Pittsburgh for a package that included next to nothing. Waddell was even so kind as to throw in Pascal Dupuis so he could reemerge as a quality winger. Ilya Kovalchuk's demands were too rich for the team, and the result was him being exiled to New Jersey for almost nothing. Kari Lehtinen moved for roughly nothing. Most of the veteran acquisitions were let go in free agency for nothing. Yet their apparent answer to all of this was grossly overpaying Ron Hainsey. It set the team back years. And it's all thanks to the worthless folks at Atlanta Spirit for not investing in scouting and development. Here's my question though. If the Thrashers had lost $130 million since you bought the team, then why the hell did the Hawks sign Joe Johnson to that exorbitant contract? You knew Johnson wasn't worth anywhere close to that, yet Atlanta Spirit approved it anyway? Why should Atlanta support the Thrashers when ownership doesn't give a fuck? So people would slowly walk away from the team, echoing the 70s. It wasn't like they were missing much. The team was pretty shit by this point. So as a result of dwindling attendance, the Thrashers were forced to resort to gimmicky marketing tactics that were desperate at best and tone-deaf at worst. 48-year-old Chris Chelios, the mascot, getting arrested in a low-speed chase in a Zamboni, marketing the black players to appeal to the urban crowd. Even the GM is holding up signs begging them to come to games. Players changed, coaches changed, Rick Dudley became GM as Don Waddell ascended to presidency. None of it worked, and by that point the writing was on the wall. Ownership would be taking solicitors to sell the team. And there weren't many people from Atlanta willing to keep the experiment going. Not to pay rent for Phillips Arena. The NHL had a choice to make. Keep Atlanta or keep Phoenix. Glendale threw $25 million to keep the team around, so they stayed. So the league was giving them no aid. A group from Winnipeg came in with an offer of $170 million and it was over. The city had lost another hockey team. Considering the past two forays, the NHL probably won't be heading back here for a long time. If at all. So what can we learn from the Thrashers and their failure to thrive? To me, it's about the importance of quality ownership. Atlanta's spirit was absolute shit. Their infighting and neglect of the team cost them success in nearly every conceivable way. They didn't pay attention to what Don Waddell was doing. They just gave him rudimentary directions on what to do and he went full speed ahead with it. His hands were tied in a lot of ways, and it showed in the awful product they were putting out on the ice. But consider this. The Winnipeg Jets didn't experience playoff success either until 2018, mostly due to the poor actions of the Thrashers and Atlanta's spirit. Now imagine if that 2018 run had happened in Atlanta. Maybe the Thrashers get enough of a support base to stay put in the South. It worked for the Hurricanes and Predators. Winning cures a lot of ills, but it just didn't happen here. I used to think it was just because Atlanta was a bad hockey market. They were more into Georgia football and Braves baseball. It wasn't a four-sport city. But looking back on it now, this wasn't the fault of the fans or the city. It was the Thrashers themselves. Blue Land never had a damn chance. Not with the shitty ownership or the shitty management they had. Few teams can survive like that, especially in a market where hockey isn't a staple. My question is, what would have happened if they had legitimately competent ownership? Look at Tampa Bay. Around the time the Thrashers were on the brink of moving, the Lightning were a fucking mess. The Orankulis and Len Berry partnership had them as a punchline. Bad teams, massive financial issues, attendance plummeted, fan favorites traded left and right. But once they were finally free from them and purchased by an owner that cared, things turned around. It took a few years, but the results were obvious. If you think about it, that could have been Atlanta. But that's merely a what-if scenario. What's done is unfortunately done. So if you're a hockey fan in Atlanta still watching this, I'll pour a cold one out for you. All this time I thought all this was due to fan apathy. But now I see there were some legitimate reasons for it. You could share some beers with Coyotes fans if they move in the near future. I think they too may know a thing or two about shitty ownership.
9 minutes into this, Drew Stafford had a goal and 2 assists, and he would finish the game with 3 goals and 5 total points. 11 different Sabres notched a point, and the third period turned into a UFC on ice as at 12:49, Eric Bolton laid out a cross-check and then got sent to the showers. Neither of these teams were good. Both of them missed the playoff. Hey, is stealing an entire NHL team a crime? You have to go back in Jets history to when they were down south and a young Ilya Kovalchuk got popped with an illegal stick in 2008. I guess he got the last laugh because he got out of the box and immediately scored. Cheaters do win. He's got electric boots, a mohair suit. You know, I read it in a magazine, but Benny is a jet. This thing is, well, what is this? The lettuce on this guy is amazing. Too bad he's not the #1 jet mascot, as Mickey Mouse is their go-to. I'm surprised Disney hasn't sued them for using the name. Mickey is also the mascot for the Manitoba Moose. Ah, I get it. Cost.
The Winnipeg Jets, a team with such high potential every single season but end up falling short in the playoffs every single year, disappointing their fans every offseason. So where did this all begin, you might ask? Well, in this case, we must travel back to the year 1980. After the WHA folded, the Jets get promoted to the Major League along with the Whalers and Oilers, and they start off the season with a mediocre start. Great start, Jets. Get the sweet taste of having one of the worst records in NHL history and having to go through 3 different head coaches, one of them who quit after 1 win. Congratulations, you finished the season over 500 and made the playoffs for once. Unfortunately, the Blues are here to take you out back. Be shut out in the first round by your WHL brothers in the Oilers. Alright, this year you can make something happen. You hold the record for most 30 goal scorers in a season and have high hopes for the playoffs. You got this. You won a playoff series! Unfortunately, the Oilers want revenge and shut you out again and throw you into the Nile River. General Manager John Ferguson fires longtime coach Barry Long, and Ferguson steps in as head coach himself. They struggle to make it into the playoffs and get eliminated by the Flames. The new head coach is a guy named Dan Maloney, who had a 45-100 win record with the Maple Leafs beforehand. That should fill in the blanks of what's going to happen. So you beat the Flames in the first round again, and then you get shut out by the Oilers. Again. Do I even need to say who you lost to again? You get no playoffs this year, as you are now officially terrible again. Completely rebuild by firing both General Manager Ferguson and Coach Maloney, and this time instead of one captain, you now have 3 for big leadership. Even with the rebuild making it to the playoffs, you are beaten by the Oilers again. Alright, time to go all in this season's draft. Starting by trading the longtime team captain for 3 players from Buffalo. But that's not the biggest stars we want to focus on. We only have one player in our mind, and his name is Keith Tkachuk. Even with the legend of Keith Tkachuk, you guys are still terrible. The new head coach of John Paddock leads you into a playoff run for what feels like decades, and they lose in the first round again. Well, this time it wasn't the Oilers, oh no. This time it was the Canucks. And that's even more painful. The Canucks are the new Oilers as you lose them in the first round again. Complete and utter trash to the league as you finish last in the league and the team is now in a crisis. Even with the top players of Keith Tkachuk and Alex Zamenhof, you guys failed to make the playoffs by 1 game. After the Nordiques moved to Colorado, you guys are now the smallest Canadian market in the NHL. The NHL no longer wants to pay for the city of Winnipeg and sell it to a Phoenix businessman. Pack your bags, boys, you're going to Phoenix. Or should I say 12 miles away from Phoenix. Congratulations, the trip to Phoenix was a disaster and the team is now bankrupt. So what does this mean for the Jets, you might ask? Well, for this we must go back to the mid-90s. The city of Atlanta, a city who has only seen a championship in the form of baseball with the Braves. As for the Falcons and the Hawks, they have never even come close to winning a championship. The NHL feels bad for the city, so they give Atlanta their own team. True, the Flames played there in the 70s and they failed, but this time it's different. This time, the city of Atlanta will see the true power of the Atlanta Thrashers. Atlanta face plants into the ice with a last place opening season. But hey, at least you kept your first round pick in Patrick Stefan. Yeah. This time you pick a better pick in Danny Heatley, and even better is that you didn't finish last place this time, but are still terrible. So, at least you're improving a bit. It turns out that improving you felt was actually hemorrhoids and you finished in last place again. Captain Danny Heatley crashes Ferrari in a serious accident. He can't play this season, but ends up making a full recovery. However, there's a worse tragedy we must discuss that is truly devastating. Their center, Darren Snyder, was also in that car during the accident. Unfortunately, he didn't make it and passed away 6 days later. I have no other words for this other than, may you rest in peace, buddy. Kovalchuk is a top star for you guys, as he scores 41 goals in the season. Unfortunately, you don't even come close to making the playoffs. Brian Heatley is still traumatized by the tragic accident and demands a trade to the city of Ottawa, who, by the way, was a key contender to their Stanley Cup final run. Oh dear God, you guys are actually achieving something for once in your lives. For the first time in franchise history, you guys are going to the Stanley Cup playoffs. And you get swept by the Rangers, the best in the Southeast Division, and you embarrass yourself so hard in the first round. Did I also mention this is the only time you guys will ever make the playoffs? Welcome to hell, Atlanta. Starting the season off with an 0-6 record and firing your head coach and becoming a laughingstock of the league. At least you hosted the All-Star game, so at least that's cool. Owner Steve Belkin is tired of the team and heads to court to decide the team's fate in the future. This could be a sign of the end. It also doesn't help that the team still sucks at everything. Oh, you almost made the playoffs, but just a few points short. But hey, at least you got a 4th overall pick in Evander Kane. Well, that went well. But let's not forget you traded Andrew Ladd in that draft as well. Need I remind you, he was also a key contender to a Stanley Cup run, this time in Chicago. It is over. The years of pain and failure in Atlanta is over. The Thrashers are now relocating to the city of Winnipeg. You know, I feel bad for the Thrashers. They would have achieved a lot more if they put better ownership and coaching in the team. And a part of me still wishes they were still with us today. Just like the Nordiques and Whalers, they will always have a legacy in my heart. May you bring hope to the city of Winnipeg now. You guys are still technically the Atlanta Thrashers because just like the Thrashers, they are mediocre. But you know what, that was just the first season back in years, and they can get it back together. After all, the NHL is on a lockout and they can regroup and go all out. Throw an exorbitant amount of money at Evander Kane. This won't doubt be a scar in our franchise. I may have lied about that. Hey, this Zach Bogasian guy seems decent. Let's sign him to a 7-year deal until he's in his early 30s. Oh hey, Blake Wheeler, you get an extension. And you Little, you also get an extension. Because us Jets are going to the Stanley Cup. That cup ended up being a red Solo cup in a dumpster next to a homeless guy. Oh my god, it's happening. For the first time since the 90s, the Jets are going to the playoffs. Heck, they might win their first playoff game since the 90s as well, as they lead against the Ducks of all teams. This is their time. Win a game for once. What do you mean they blew a 2-goal lead? Are you kidding me? Well, at least you can beat them in other games. They seriously got swept by the Ducks? I mean, it's one thing to lose to them in the series, but swept? Now that's just embarrassing to the city of Winnipeg. After that horrendous playoff games and the start of the season, Andrew Ladd is now officially gone as captain. In fact, here in Chicago, you can have 2 of other teams as well as Marco Dano and a first-round pick. He becomes a huge bust for Winnipeg. As for the 3 years he played for Winnipeg, he managed to get, drumroll please, 22 points. Well hey, at least you got that first round pick in Patrick Lane. Spoiler alert, that doesn't help you in the regular season. Oh look, they made it back to the playoffs, hoop-de-doo. But just go ahead and lose in the first round like always.
And he'll play it to the line, Morrow scores!
Wait, they actually won a game? And the first round for once? Oh well, they were facing the Predators, you don't even stand a chance. You guys did it. The 3rd round of the playoffs. For once in a franchise, the team finally sees hope, not just for the playoffs, but for the team itself. Now go on, boys. Round 3 is waiting for you. The team falls apart to the Vegas Golden Knights. Needless to say that this was their inaugural season. Okay, look, you may have lost in the 3rd round last season, but hopes are high for you guys. Heck, they even make the playoffs again, facing off the Blues of all teams. This is gonna be a piece of cake. What do you mean they only won 2 games? You lost in the first round again? What is wrong with you? Oh, did I mention those same Blues went on to win the Stanley Cup? This was their first cup they have ever won in their franchise. And guess who hasn't won a Stanley Cup yet? That's right, Winnipeg. You. But hey, just get past that as your season is looking very promising and possibly more than first round contenders maybe. There's only one thing that can stop you now. A pandemic. The world has stopped spinning and everyone stays inside for months with no hockey. But you can crawl back into the bubble and go forward with the playoffs. And look, it's their Canadian rivalry of the Flames. This is gonna be easy. Okay, look, that was just a warm-up game. You're still rusty, that's all. Next game you can beat them.
Forbert watching Kyle Connor. Peanut scores!
See? Why did I tell you? You got this, no problem. Now take the other 2 games. Really? You're gonna do this again? Yep, just like Jets fashion, they lose in the first round again. See? Brian Little is doing things. Oh wait, hockey gods, no! Don't do it! No! Lord have mercy on this team. And now Patrick Lane is also gone. You guys are screwed. How did you guys make the playoffs? I thought you guys were dead. But Edmonton is a pretty tricky opponent now. I must now say rest in peace because they have a 3-0 series lead and you know the Jets will blow it. Just play the clip.
Oh, golden opportunity. Kyle Connor shoots and he scores!
The Jets can shut out teams now? The Canadians use the Uno reverse card and this time they sweep you. You see how this team can't accomplish things? I mean, they try, yes, but they still can't get anywhere. In my opinion, the start of the fall was when they originally moved to Phoenix. I mean, Phoenix itself was a stain in the pants of the league for years, with the low attendance, underachieving players, and bankruptcy. How could you possibly move past that? But maybe one day, the Jets will no longer be the Jets.